Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and Lloyd streamer, and today we're going to be doing a new segment on the channel. We'll see how it works, and if anybody is actually interested in it, you can access it from my link tree with all of my other links in case you are interested, and I'll give an explanation of it. So this is going to be called Crit This, where if you're an unpublished author or you're an author with something that is unpublished and you would like feedback to be given here, I want to use this opportunity to teach sort of looking at works, how to discuss works in a respectable manner, hopefully, and we can see kind of how feedback works. Now, I'm not going to read what is sent in its entirety. I do want to respect the privacy of the unpublished work. And in another way, this isn't going to be like my book reviews, where when I'm doing my Thursday book reviews, I'm doing them as a consumer because those are a finished item. They're out for sale. I purchased them. So I'm reading them as basically me, and I'm going to talk about them whether I like them or not and be very brutally honest in a different sort of way because I am consuming them. This is an unpublished work, which means it's still being crafted. So we're going to approach it very differently. It is not about personal taste. It is not about whether I have a good time or not. It is about looking at what is being presented and discussing what parts of it make us think what. Now, on that note, there are a lot of people out there who try to say that feedback or opinions are objective and there is something as objective storytelling, and there's really not. Because things that I like about a story, somebody else might think are horrible to the story or just not enjoyable, and vice versa. Things they like, I might think are absolutely terrible. Like, I don't like torturing characters. I don't like watching characters be tortured. I don't like excessive sex. I don't like stories that are just about nonstop action. I don't like a lot of things that are very popular, but me not liking them doesn't mean that they don't have a value to the story. I also don't really like fantasy, and a lot of stuff is in fantasy. Today's entry is in fantasy. So we're going to try to discuss the elements, like what it is portraying, what it is expressing, that I picked up on or I interpreted. So I do want that to come across clearly with this segment. Is my opinion is just an opinion. I'm going to tell you what I saw, what I interpreted, what my thoughts were, and hopefully that'll give other writers out there, especially this writer, an idea of like how they're writing, maybe what they're wanting to portray, and if what they're portraying in their book is exactly coming across how they want it. Because I think a lot of the time when you're a writer, a fresh writer especially, and you don't have experience with feedback, you can be unsure as to whether what you're saying is coming across that way or not, or even just be totally blindsided by the way other people might interpret it. I remember somebody that I knew some years ago sent me the opening chapter of a YA book he was crafting, and he asked for feedback on it, and I mentioned in a part of there that it felt like, or that it read like, the guy lost his temper and like blacked out and like smacked the woman that he was with, and then he came to and he was very confused, and the author had no idea that it could be interpreted that way, but then after I said it, he was like, oh my gosh, I see exactly what you're saying. So this isn't anything, and whether I'm critical in whatever way, even if it's critical in the way of saying this is a poorly, like an asshole looking person, I don't know how to say that better. This person comes off as an asshole, that may be exactly what the author is going for. And just because somebody is an asshole at the beginning of the story does not mean that it is not intended. So we're going to talk about stories as they are presented to the best of my abilities, and hopefully it'll give a mirror to what the author, or a look into what the author is trying to do, and it'll hopefully give others who are not looking at this specific story some sort of way to look at their craft and your guys' stories as you go forward, to kind of examine them yourselves and teach you ways to identify elements within your own stories and how you're placing them. I know that was kind of long-winded and a little bit repetitive, but I hope it makes sense. If you have questions about this, let me know in the comments down below. This will kind of be a first example of what it'll be like since this is the first time. And again, it's going to be different than my book reviews or book discussions because we're not going to get super personal in my opinions about it. But again, all feedback is always subjective because we all focus on different things. We all like and enjoy different things, and our training and our identities, personalities, all reveal different things in art and text. And so remember that with yourself. As long as somebody is not like straight up insulting you, it's just an intention. it's just an interpretation of the story. However, if somebody is reading your book and insults you through the characters, that should be discarded. Again, there's a difference between consumer responses, which, you know, is me talking about Grady Hendrix, making jokes about why there's so much pee drinking women involved in his stories and mommy issues. There's a difference to that versus talking to the actual author and trying to help them craft a stronger story or to identify what it is their story is doing. So, with that said, like, I know I just repeated myself again, but I want to make sure, like, what we're doing here and what I'm going to attempt to do, hopefully, and also make sure that this is known. These are all personal opinions. It's just one opinion in a hat. It's same with my book reviews, honestly. But this is going to be different than those. So with that said, number one, if you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. It really helps, and hopefully we can build something cool here for creators trying to learn and grow. Because I feel like there are a ton of resources out there in general, but so much is misleading. And I don't want to say like I'm the only one who's not, because there are so many who are also good, but there are also so many out there that just want to like crush people. The whole stuff going on with Audrey Winters right now is so sad, when it should just be like a 22-year-old learning how to write rather than trying to make a bunch of money on TikTok and then being punished by a mob. But I digress. I'm not going to get into that. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. The number one way to be featured is through Leigh, the monthly prompt writing contest, where I give you a prompt, you write a short story using that prompt, and on the first Monday video of the month, we bask in your creativity. The second way to be featured is if you are an indie author and you have a book out or a book coming out. If you submit the first chapter and the cover to the Fresh Meat feature, that chapter will be read here on the channel with no comment. It is just your time to shine, because that's what I like to do here, is just give other new writers a chance to show off their stuff for the audiences who are looking for them. And hopefully it'll help more readers find you in a very easy way, which is just an audiobook basically on YouTube, but it's just your chapter one. And then the third way, which is what we're doing here today, is Crit This, where if you are an unpublished author or a writer with unpublished work and you would like feedback on like how your book is being interpreted or your story is being interpreted, it's one chapter at a time to make sure that it is like doable in a week, because I cannot read 2 books a week. I'm not that good, and I also have my own stuff going on, like a day job and writing. But I digress. If you would like to be featured in something like this, then also on the link, there is a Crit This section where you can submit it and submit a book one chapter at a time. If you enjoy what I do here for your work, then you can continue and submit more, and we'll still discuss the book chapter by chapter here, and it'll alternate, or depending on how things go, we'll see. But it'll always be on Monday, either Crit This feature or the first Monday of the month, which is Leigh, because Monday is always community day. With that said, unless we run out of community stuff, then it's like, I guess we're out. The third thing is, if you would like to check out any of my books, get a sense of my style, or judge me, because who am I to say anything, honestly? If you don't like any of my books, I get it. I am a niche writer. I just write for what I like, and I hope to express the best I can and do it as honestly as I can to represent my characters and the lives that they have and the stories they have to tell. Anyway, if you would like to read any of my books, they're available at any of your favorite places to get books, and my newest novel is featuring these guys over here and then 3 others, and it'll happen eventually. It's being worked on. That's all that I can say about it right now. With that said, let's jump into this. Now, I'm going to do the setup of this very similar to the way that I do book reviews, but the approach is going to be very different. And that's because I generally like the way that I do book reviews or book discussions, and I think that it is fairly effective in covering multiple things. So the first section that we're going to do is a synopsis of what was submitted, and the point of giving a synopsis to the writer or repeating what was expressed, not only so you guys know what was going on as, you know, bystanders to this crit, but also so that the author knows what is coming across in their writing. Sometimes you can be unaware of how things are reading or if your major elements are coming across. And in a way, when I'm doing a synopsis, and this is also why I do them in the longer the book discussions, is that it kind of shows the pacing by like what is happening and what is noted at least from my perspective. And when there is like excess of something that is distracting or breaks the pacing, or when things are like going on and on and on and on, where it doesn't seem like it's going anywhere, or we can condense the story enough that we actually can see the beats easier. I'm also doing the series in this way because I think the best way to learn how to write better, aside from reading and annotating, is the best way to talk about writing feedback or writing advice is on individual projects, because there is no writing rule or suggestion that is 100% coverall or correct for everything. And in order to write the best book that you possibly can, you need to have feedback that is specific to your project and it sees what you're trying to do. And so the best way that I can think to help anybody is to just talk about specific projects and try to read into those, as opposed to doing like vague lists of rules that are not actually rules and don't work for everyone and continuing that misinformation. So that's also why we're doing it this way. This is just going to be a synopsis of the prologue and the chapter 1 to give you guys a sense of what is going on and to express what happened that was notable enough to discuss. So the prologue, we're first introduced to a war that happened in the kingdom of elves as it came under fire by the gnomes. The king also had 3 children, a son, a daughter, and then another son. The oldest son is talented in warfare and incredibly charismatic, stating clearly that he is to take up after his father. The daughter is fairly whimsical, spending most of her time in the garden and playing jokes on some of the employees. The third son didn't have much to him. He wasn't super established like his older brother, and more like his sister in the fact that he needed to earn a place and respect under his father. But before he could, he was abducted. And that's where the prologue ends. This suggests that the main character of the story is very likely to be that third son, Einmine. What makes this suggestion more likely is how it mentions that he clings to his mother, so it's making him even less like his older brother, who is just like dad. So already creating kind of a contrast to dad, who is the king of the throne, with the younger. Because if you've got the son who fits with the dad, then it would be a completely different story, and it wouldn't necessarily... I mean, I'm going to get into the other things that could be suggested, but it gives the sense off that Einmine is unlike the rest of his family, and so the story is going to center around him because he is different from the others. The other possibility is the story is either of the father trying to get the son back, or the older brother and maybe the sister being sent on a journey to bring the brother back, possibly even after dad dies. And then you've got the siblings all coming together in a kind of Chronicles of Narnia. It's an ensemble main cast. I bring this up because there are a few different ways to look at this intro, as it doesn't put an emphasis on one way or another, aside from how much that younger brother stands out compared to the rest of his family. And depending on if it's a story of Einmine earning his place alongside his brother and father and making his father proud, his older brother earning his place under his father as the inheritor, or a story of dad bringing his kid home, then the different story is going to have a different target audience. So a story of like dad getting his son back is going to be more for an older audience who also sees more interest in the fatherhood line, the God of War style line. However, if it's more about Einmine, then it's going to be about him coming of age, finding his place, finding his power, and earning his father and brothers and families in general respect. And that is going to make the audience likely younger, so it is more YA or younger adult. That's not to say that once you have a target audience that it's not going to appeal to people outside of the target audience, but the target audience is who the main audience of interest is going to be in the book, and it's separate from a general audience. And that only matters when you're like selling. It doesn't matter when you're writing, but by the time that you're editing it, you kind of want to sort of get an idea of what it is you're writing and be able to discuss what the story is about, which from how many authors or how many writers go, I can't talk about my stories when people ask, I freak out. It's very important to learn how to discuss your stories in a quick way and then in a shorthand way. And one of those ways, that's also why I do the synopsis, is to identify who the main character is and what his goal is or her goal is in the beginning of the story. It doesn't have to be the long game. It doesn't have to be in order to save the planet. It's like what starts the journey. And that's going to be the way that you want to figure out how to discuss your work to get the door open in order to introduce it to other people. You know, like with Joey in Bodymore, I'm not going to discuss the whole of that plot when I'm just throwing it at somebody to see if they're interested, and I'm just introducing them to the concept. So I'm going to say, you know, she's a mechanic who lives in Baltimore, and she goes to pick up her friend's car at a local park when she doesn't find him, but she finds a body in the trunk, and the cops think the body, that the person there was murdered by her friend. So she's racing the cops to get to her friend. That's what she's doing. That's just the beginning of the story. That's in the first chapter, so it's not a spoiler that there's a body in the trunk. And we know it's at risk. We know who she is, and we already know, just even from that synopsis, what she values, which is that friendship, which is the relationships that she has. So when you're looking at your own story, you want to try to identify the thing at the beginning that is going to make that character go into action. One of the famous, I want to say famous, it's only famous in book 2 from years ago, but even in The Cyborg Tinkerer, we know what motivates her at the beginning is she is a brain tumor and she's going to die. So she wants the surgery that she is offered in order to get rid of that brain tumor and possibly have a new life. And so that motivates her into joining the cyborg circus, right? And then the same thing with Jan is we know from the very beginning that his goal is to succeed at YouTube so that he can make money so he can take care of his family and make his father especially proud. So you know what motivates these characters. And that's going to be something that we get into with this book as we move on forward. But if you're wondering how to summarize your story, that is one of the things that will draw readers in because it is a personal stake. Saving the world is not a personal stake. Making it personal, making it small, making it motivated as whatever is at the beginning is the personal stake that's going to get people invested in that character because they're now human and not like this superhuman thing, right? So moving on to chapter 1. I know I just ranted about what did I talk about. Moving on to chapter 1, and I'm going to read you the first couple of paragraphs because it's all separate from In Mind, and I also want to give you an idea of what the writing is like because I think this writing is very specific, and we're going to discuss the writing style a little bit in some of the other segments. So chapter 1 opens with, quote, "The first recollection gathered was the warmth of his bedside, all coming to him in a haze of shades and loose hues. From a night of passion he stood and walked from the simple cot that the serfs had shambled together. He splashed his face in cold water, bringing shape to the world. His squire pressed armor against his form, clasping it in place. He mounted his great steed and rode on. The camp growing small and distant, the cold of his armor was his only companion. They marched on, and myriad forms mirrored his own. Silver armor, curved swords, and enchantments abound. He felt his long ears twitch in alarm, and the pace of their march was set upon. A sundering shout pierced the skies, and the world became a sharp and dangerous thing. Lance lowered and spurred his mount to a charge to ram through the foe. 1, 2, 3. A green trio impaled on his mighty weapon. In this he found pride. The power of his blood remained and proved fruitful. A thundercrack cut through the battlefield, and his beast fell. Part of its form was torn away with a rising chorus of battle. Tracing its path in the air, he saw a cannon and knew his purpose. He rose and drew his weapon. He charged forth without his great steed. He raised a hand, and space went around him as he stepped from the material and into the fay and back again, and he descended upon them. He fell upon an orc, and with a twirl of his blade he built a lethal momentum. Not one to take the guileful approach, he blunted the edge of his sword on the meat of the orc's neck. His weapon caught in a thick sinew of the green skin's neck. He instead spun around him, taking most of his head. The challenge then arose as another orc fell upon him, whilst his sword was still caught in his first foe. Raising a hand, caught it in guard of his vambrace, buckling but not breaking, his elvish meat and muscle stopping the weapon. He ran his blade up and through from under the new green skin jaw, bursting from the back of his head like a macabre unicorn. He pushed ahead, and the orcish weapon fell from his arm, taking most of the limb with it, and burning heat rising from what was left of his dominant hand. He pushed through, meeting a blade against axe, mace, and costus. Soon, though, another cannon found its sight aligned with him. Had he not done enough? or was it the end tide of their foe? He felt the concave of the ammunition breach his breastplate. The world lost its form, and the space of his chest was now vacant, with the force rent upon him. The last thing passing his mind was a rising chorus of orcish cries. Perception faded to an inky blackness, as though the dead man was drowning in his mind, as though plunging into a lake of death. So I wanted to read this in its entirety for two reasons. One, it doesn't match the prologue. So we're fighting gnomes in the prologue, but orcs in the opening of this thing, which leads me to believe that it is actually a premonition being had by Ainmine, and that this is going to be a battle that he is put into later. Especially because it doesn't name who the character is, it's keeping it vague, so it likely means that it is this character who is experiencing this battle later, which again is going to go into the part of him earning his role, is going to be him finding his place, coming of age. And another thing to note is that there are no other characters in this scene that are assisting him. Like, everybody is faceless. That he, in this dream, is the hero, and he is doing it all by himself. So that may end up also being kind of important, whether it's thematic or whether it's accidental, to make it kind of the story is all about how this character has to shoulder all of his burdens alone. It is possible, because that is what it is expressing right here. Another thing is this portion of the chapter doesn't really establish who the character is because of the vagueness, and that also is going to make a distance from the reader, because now we actually have two different starting points. We have the prologue, which is a different starting point, and then this dream, which is a different starting point. Or I'm assuming it's a dream, because right after this, Ainmine wakes up and then does his morning stuff. And so that distance may make it harder for the reader to identify with the character, to be invested with the character. And the reader doesn't have to identify with a character. There is no rule that says a character or main character has to be likable or identifiable, but just know that there will be an emotional distance, and that is the method, or that is the technique that this is using, because of the distance between the readership, the language it is using, the vagueness that it is using, and how it is not being direct to kind of bring the reader into what is happening, and instead using the vagueness to create a sense of mystery, like what is going on? Who is this? Why are they in battle? Where did this battle come from? And why is it happening at the beginning of the book? Now, one of my suggestions for this is that I think that it would work better if that was actually the prologue, maybe, instead of the thing being about, you know, the king having 3 sons, and then we could discover Ainmine and his siblings through the first chapter as he is talking about being released from where he is being held. Or his goal is, you know, to get back to his family after he is finally released, because then that gives us a personal goal and it introduces us to the family in a way that the prologue did, but with more meaning and with more momentum. The other thing that I wanted to note is that the first chapter is called Abducted, and then the end of the prologue obviously mentions that the son was abducted. So the idea is that it is suggesting, with the title being Abducted, that the abduction is either going to be a climax, so we're going to experience that abduction, or this is going to be... No, I think that's it. I think that's what I mean to say. It gives the impression that you're going to be experiencing the abduction as a climax, or it's going to play a major part in the chapter, enough so that it is titled that. However, the abduction plays hardly any role, and there really is no explanation as to how far ahead of the abduction we are, how we got to where we are, or what he's been doing since he was abducted. There is a reference in this chapter that he was abducted, and that is also relating to his release, but we don't have a lot of information about what he has been doing, why he's been treated the way he is, how long he's been here, like any of that. And we don't need all of the answers in chapter 1 for sure. It's just, you do want to give an idea of like the circumstances in which you're coming into, what is the norm for the character, because you establish the norm for the character before breaking it with change, right? Sort of. That's like one of the ways. There are multiple ways to start a story, but my suggestion in general is, if you're going to do it this way, then you kind of want to establish, give the reader the stakes, give the reader the setting, give the, you know, enough information that they need to get along with, okay, so this is where we are, this is who we're with, this is what they care about at this given time, so then we can follow along as they make choices as the story gets started. Again, we don't need all the information, we just need enough information in order to follow the decisions the character is making in their introduction. Oh, another thing that is going to suggest that this opening part of the story is a dream is the fact that there is very little description as to where this man is. There are no descriptions of buildings. There are no descriptions of battleground. It is just the violence and the vitriol of the battle scene and his getting stabbed or his stabbing an orc. And again, that is going to be the suggestion that this is a dream because we're not establishing a place, and again, we're leaving it vague. However, the next part, when it opens up with Ainmine waking up in his room, has so much more detail by contrast that it is an incredible amount of detail that it slows stuff down and you mostly get detail of stuff instead of story. But that's just another thing to show the contrast between what is likely a dream state versus what is reality and how it is being contrasted in this. A final issue that I want to mention between the prologue and the dream state is that these are two false starts before the novel even gets going, which may leave some readers feeling disoriented because we're not sure where we are, who we're with, and that happens twice at the very beginning before establishing like the ground with the reader. And it works for a prologue. It can even work for like 2 prologues because some people do multiple prologues. Personally, I don't have anything against prologues, but I do think that they need to be deployed the best way possible. And if you waste my time with like 2 false starts, I've talked about this before with the Dark Harvest. I'm going to be looking for ways in which those actually mean anything. But I don't actually think the prologue of this saying he begot 3 children is really necessary to the start of the story. After the dream state, the first chapter continues with Ainmine waking up, leaving his lodgings, checking in on his workstation in a warehouse somewhere where he sort of has these little mechanical things that he has made. They hide from others, but they respect him, so they come out to see him when he comes to visit. He also goes through the busy streets of wherever he's at, and he gets a pastry and compliments the bakery girl who's there on her abilities to make delicious baked goods. It feels like they would have more of a relationship for how long he has been there, but they're also sort of acting like this is the first time they've ever talked in a really weird way. So I would fix that to consider, like, how long have they known each other? Has he stopped at this bakery before? Are they familiar with each other, even if they're kind of strangers, but like friendly strangers because he comes in regularly? Like, think of those things because it's those details that affect how they would interact and then ends up making a world feel lived in, because these characters, we might be meeting them for the first time, but within the pages of the book, a lot of these characters like this, when you've been living in captivity, you would know these characters before we know these characters, and you would have an established relationship. And we can see that established relationship through the way the characters talk. It doesn't need to be described to us. We can just watch it happen. Anyway, after he's done talking to that, he heads over to what is sort of described as a graduation. He describes it as also leaving his gilded cage, so we don't really know what that is. It is some reference to his dad made a pact with the gnomes, probably back when he was abducted, but we don't know anything about any of that. We don't know what his stakes are. We don't know what he knows about the abduction or about the pact. We just know that he knows about the pact. He's going to be released, and then he meets a gnome there who is kind of stoic and seems to treat him a little differently than possibly other gnomes. But again, it's more vague, and it feels like it's not fully establishing the world in which this character lives and how long he has lived in it, in order to give the reader a sense of like depth of this scene, right? So that is the entirety of chapter 1. Now, the genre that I would guess for this in reading into it and seeing how it is opened is going to be YA and high fantasy. What makes it YA is the coming of age of a character being released into the world in a similar way of graduating in school to go and find out who he is, to return home, likely prodigal son maybe, though he didn't leave, he got kidnapped. And then if we have that war, and if that war is a premonition at the beginning of this, that he is going to have to go and fight the orcs, then you're going to have this kid taking a lead and becoming a leadership of his own, which is a coming-of-age story. The hook, we don't necessarily have any idea of where the story is going to go just yet with this first chapter, as it also kept the reader at arm's distance with the setting. The character is under the charge of the gnomes, and he has been for some time, is sort of what it is expressing. And though we don't know what age he was when he was abducted, the title of the chapter kind of throws you off in general as a reader, because you think that you're going to get an explanation for the abduction, but you really don't. Personally, I'm not a fan of chapter titles, because usually they're like on the nose, or somebody is making a joke, or it's a spoiler, and that's a personal thing. A lot of people love chapter titles. I am just not one of them. There's also this hostility between Ainmine and the gnome as they're standing at the elevator at the end, which likely comes from the treatment that Ainmine has received and a history with those people, because the gnomes and the elves don't really seem to get along. Obviously, the gnomes kidnapped an elf king's son, and there was some pact in place that the elf king never tried to get his son back. So we'll see that, and we'll see if that makes Ainmine mad or anything. But what makes this struggle as the intro with the hook is that we don't know what Ainmine values, what his goals might suggest. Like, if he wants to get home, if he wants to go on adventure, if he just wants to get the frick out of... I mean, we know he wants to get out of this gold cage, but we don't know what. And he spends so much time kind of navel gazing around the town and, like, admiring the creations that he has, or slipping through the bustling streets, or just eating that pastry, that we don't get a sense of what is driving him, what he is waiting to do. And that could be even like the pastry isn't a normal thing for him, and he's getting it to himself as a congratulations, as a last time to eat it, maybe a last time to see that girl because she's so nice, and he's going to miss her when he leaves. Like, there are so many ways to add depth and detail to this in minute ways that express the world being lived in, that aren't there. But we don't know what's important to him beyond getting out of the control of the gnomes, which is more referenced at than allowing us to see what it is that is driving him and what he is waiting for to happen after he visits with the gnomes. He has a quiet appreciation for things that other people don't. That comes through in some of the descriptions, which is also setting him apart to look alienated where he's at, and that he's had a hard time fitting in, and that he likely has never fit in where he is. He doesn't even live in this school dorms where everybody else lives because he's not allowed to, probably because he's different. So there's another thing that sets him apart. So those are all things that we see in the beginning, but then none of them lead up to telling us or suggesting to us, hinting to us what is important to him. We don't know if freedom is important to him. We don't know if his family is important to him. We don't know if adventure is important to him. We don't have any personal motivator. It is just kind of like, this is happening. So it's an event. So that is going to lead to the idea that this is going to be a plot-driven story with very little, like, investigating character even. And you don't have to get super deep with the character. It's just there is no talking about or reference about, like, what he cares about. It's just like, this thing is happening because it's happening, because the story has to have it happen, not because character is waiting for it to happen or something has started in order to let it happen. Does that make sense? Going on to the language to me was dry, verbose, and very stylized. The choice of stylization for it is very impersonal and saps emotion from it for readers like me, and also saps character from it because it's so formal. But it may be what others are looking for in a more archaic feeling of a fantasy novel. And since I'm not a fantasy reader or a fan of these types of novels, then others would have to say, you know, whether that style works for them or not, if it is what they are looking for, because I like the more personal books. It's also personally why I generally like first person a lot. Not that I don't like third person, but I love first person. When it's done well, when it's done bad, it is cringy as heck. Anyway, going on to description, the writing is highly stylized and I think may appeal to a specific kind of reader. This is also why I had to read that full section so you could see how it was written. Since I'm not really a fantasy enjoyer, I can't tell you which fantasy readers would crave this. However, I know that they are there. The descriptions to me feel too wordy and impersonal to catch me, and in some places seem to want to be overly visceral, that it loses effectiveness for what it is trying to say in the picture that it is creating. Here's a quote. His elvish meat and muscle stopping the weapon. It could have just said his elvish muscle stopped the weapon and we didn't need to use meat, but that just feels like it is trying to be more visceral in using meat. because the muscle and the meat are going to be the same thing in stopping the weapon. We also have the opening phrase, quote, "First recollection gathered was the warmth of his bedside, all coming to him in a haze of shades and loose hues. From a night of passion he stood and walked from the simple cot that the serfs had shambled together." This to me is not strong, because instead of being direct, its stylization leans less on opening with a picture for the reader's mind, and a verbose description of him abruptly takes away from it being a panic. However, and that's what it is, because he quickly puts on the armor later and then gets into a fight. Though it is giving the idea of stoic, and that may be what the author is going for in writing this style. And again, it goes to the archaic. While the intro is not to my taste, it does give a good indication of the style of this novel and what it will be. And so if the reader doesn't like it, they'll know fairly quickly if they're not going to be the person for this book. I would also like to bring attention to this little bit for some line editing. "Forgive my brevity. The graduation ceremonies are today, and the Academy is granting its accolades." Her eyes sparkled as he spoke. "My grandfather studied with the gnomes as well." Excitement bubbled from her as she regaled him with tales of her elder patriarch. "He was their earliest graduate in transmutatives. He published over 100 of these in school." So when you're looking at this and her continuation of her talking, the bit about the excitement bubbled as isn't necessary, because we're going to see it immediately after. That is a picture of telling instead of showing, and something that could be just showing. And I'm not somebody who thinks that you can only show and tell, or only tell and show. I think that a lot of stories, it depends on what it is that you're doing, but it's important to recognize in the story which parts it is that you are wanting to show and which parts you're wanting to tell. And when she's already going to be talking about her patriarch in the next paragraph, because that's what she's saying, then we don't need a summary of what she's about to say just before she says it. World building. So this book contains both magic and technology, though it's not entirely clear what the whole setup is yet. It doesn't have to be. This is the first chapter. There are elves common enough in this place that he is one, but they're not so common that it's just assumed everybody is an elf, and so then when he's talking to an elf, he tells you that they are an elf, or he tells you when they are a gnome. I'm not entirely sure where this character is, because it doesn't really establish it, and that's one of the difficulties that comes with the split beginning with the prologue and the theoretical dream state, is you're kind of guessing at this as it sort of establishes it, but not quite. So you kind of go along for the ride. Again, you don't have to do everything in the first chapter. Parts of this is just going through the first couple of chapters to get a sense of this story, the sense of the setting, but letting the readers know what circumstances he is living in and has been living in just casually as he goes through his story is going to help immensely. The chapter later references being abducted, seemingly by the gnomes, so it's not an active thing as the chapter may have suggested. But that then leads to other questions, such as, why was he captured? How long has he been there? What were the provisions that were given so that he was not taken back by his father, and so that the gnomes and the elves didn't go to war? How is it that they have gotten away with abusing him for all of these years when there is possibly an agreement, a pact with the gnomes so that nothing happened to the son? Because we hear that his knuckles are all scarred up from the way that he was treated by some of the elder gnomes in this place. If he was treated so poorly, why was he even allowed to study along the gnomes instead of kept as a prisoner? What made him be in the gilded cage? We don't need all of the answers, again, but we need to know the circumstances in which he has been living and what is his normal, instead of being kept at an arm's distance where we don't know anything of what is normal, and it doesn't say anything about anything, and we just go along and then we're like, why this or why that? The chapter spends a lot of time describing things, including his alienation, and repeating that this is his last day before release. But it never says what he is being released from, or how he knows that it is his last day. So anticipation, again, it's something that he would know, so then the reader should know. I think that in part it's keeping it vague in order to have a mystery to put on the reader, so the reader is like, why is he here? What's going on? But I think that is an often done pitfall by new authors, that they think that keeping things vague on purpose of the reader is going to create mystery and intrigue to have them turn the page. But what will create more mystery and intrigue is getting the readers invested in the character and the story so that they choose to go along and see that character succeed or try to get what he's making, as opposed to a complete vagueness by not informing the reader of needed information when it is needed. And that's the secret, is knowing when to dispense the right amount of information at the right time. Characters. We don't really have any sense of any characters, period, in this. The gnome at the end kind of gives a sense of stoicism, but we have no sense of who his dad is. Dad is only referenced. Mom is not even referenced. Older brother and sister are referenced just as much as dad is. And so Ainmine is the only character that is really here. You've got the girl, but she is more of a utility, it feels like, than an actual character. The book makes it very clear that Ainmine is going to be the main character, as it describes every small detail of his appearance, of his workshop, and that and the respect that he gives to his creations. It also talks about his ability to move through crowd space, very specifically like a fish swimming upstream. That's not the words that it uses, but it's like he is adept at moving through crowds, and his interest in the smell of earth and material. So all of these details that it points out about him are saying that he is different from those around him, or else they wouldn't be noted. His appreciation for these simple things is yet another thing that makes him stand out as not fitting in with the crowd that is around him. It is kind of interesting contrast to introduce him as a prince, but no one seems to give him any notice or any extra abuse as an outsider. He's completely alienated in this setting, and was also hinted at in the opening of the prologue, but not by having anything to his name like his older brother did, but his sister also lacks those claims but is not being punished like he is. He also refers to his existence as a gilded cage, which I think would be more present / visible if we actually got to see what these restrictions were that he was living under, such as, being walked around by guards, being told where he had to be at what times, and if he wasn't, he'd get smacked on the back of the head, because then we actually get to see the violence that he is talking about and the cage that he is living in and how strict it is, as opposed to being told it, but not seeing any of that, and then having to believe it without seeing any of it, right? So that would be my suggestion, is to ground it more in what does his daily life look like and how is he getting to where he's going, for what purpose, and let the reader see how he lives so that we can live as authentically as we can through him. The dialogue, it comes off as more utilitarian than character driven, and it is often more exposition than distinctive to character voice or personality or style. And that could again be the dry style of this sort of fantasy where the characters are less defined and it is more, you talk to me so you can get the quest or you can get the background information and move on to the next thing. Even that girl with the pastry didn't have a personality. She just had exposition. Plot. At the moment, I'm not able to see the potential for plot other than Ainmine fighting his own massive battle, possibly against the orcs, after he has made a connection with the people, and possibly coming back and making friends with that gnome who is the stoic one at the beginning, who's kind of different than possibly others, who was maybe his mentor in this world. But if the dream sequence at the beginning is anything to go by, then it is likely that he could face it all by himself, or the premonition will suggest that if he tries to face it by himself, then he will die. So there are those two options, but that's pretty much all that we have, and it's difficult to kind of tell a plot, where a plot might go, when we don't know what the character values. Because at least at the beginning of a book or beginning of a story, you can kind of see where the first choice is going to lead, because they're taking you where they're trying to accomplish what it is they've stated they wanted, even if it gets complicated along the way. Overall, I think that this opening could be improved by allowing the reader to know what Ainmine's immediate goals are beyond leaving the city. Is he going back to his family and his father? Are they anticipating his return? What does he need? Does he even care about his family? What is the deal that was referenced in this story? Though the reader doesn't need to have all of the answers in the first chapter, it helps the reader get invested if we know what is important to the character, and we can be happy for them to chase it and make the decisions to get closer to what they are after. In some part, it's nature and taking it slow. He doesn't, in some part, what he prefers is nature and taking it slow, as he said with the earthen elements. He doesn't seem like he wants to be in power in any way. He just wants a quiet life, but we've no idea what's at stake for him now as an abducted individual, or why he is there, and what sort of terms he is looking at leaving on. This comes off as keeping it vague as a sense of mystery to the reader, but I think that it would be more effective to let the reader in on the circumstances than to keep it this way, and this is a common pitfall that new authors make. Also, further establishes relationships within this place for how long he has been there, like the girl at the bakery. Was that the first time that he'd ever spoken to her? If so, how many years has he been there? Like, give a feeling. Don't straight up tell us. Just give us a feeling of how involved he is with any of these people. Giving the implication of a lived-in world just by the way that he interacts with others and implied relationships, and also taking immediate goals like getting him home to see his family after so long of being apart from them would add so much characterization to this story that it is currently lacking on first impression. But so those are my opinions on this. This video is longer than I thought it was going to be for what is just an actual short. I need to learn how to talk better, honestly. But those are the things that I'm paying attention to when I'm reading, and so that's my feedback. Let me know what your thoughts are in general with strong openings. I've recently done a couple of videos on establishing beginnings and like the promises that people are making, because that's one thing that your first chapter is. It's a promise of style, it's a suggestion of style, it's a suggestion of character, and your opening character doesn't have to be good. They don't have to be likable. They just have to kind of present who they are and to sort of show what's important, because that's what we're going to be following them doing. With that said, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And did you like this segment? Was this helpful? Should I keep doing it if people want it? Let me know. With that said, have a great week and don't die.
To my children, Tommy, Ike, and Annabelle, if you forget everything else I ever said in the lifetime we shared together, I need you to remember 3 things. 1. Minimize violence done to and by women. As givers of life, it's against their nature, God's design, to do harm, and every act of violence done to them is meant to break their souls, turning what should be a giver of hope into a black widow, a woman who destroys the life and the mercy of her care for no other reason but the corruption of her own self. It is only when you come across these kinds of women that you should put them down, for they are no better than the men who tarnished them. However, take no glee in what must be done. Finding any life so far gone, a black hole is where someone's heart should be, leaves only one solution: the mercy of death, and it's a tragedy when it happens. Make no mistake, a woman's love is the most powerful thing on this earth. It can start wars, end them, and change the devil himself into someone God sees worthy of giving a second chance. She don't owe this love to anyone, but she do carry it around with her so long as she's living. That is why the devil will do everything he can to pervert women's nature and destroy their innocence. Of every crime you can commit during your lifetime, be it out of daring or necessity, for every defiance you may act out against God, government, or man, avoid harming the innocent. For the day that we become bloodthirsty beasts where love don't exist anymore is the day hell on earth has come. And as bad as it may seem at times nowadays, we ain't there yet. 2. Everything you do in your life will create consequences, both seen and unseen, extending further than you can imagine. Nothing you do exists solely within your arm's reach. Think about every decision you make, every action you take, because you won't know how long your choices will stalk you, be them destructions or blessings, rumors or history been made. The truth of the matter is, your life will be controlled not by the truth of what you've done, but by the way others carry on about you. And the thoughts of others are more real in the long term than what you know to be true. It won't stop affecting you just because it ain't real, and no matter the life you've lived, most men can't outrun what's written in them in ink. It ain't hopeless though. Be firm in knowing who you are outside of the noise, and live beyond the means of the news of the day. 3. There ain't anything stronger than a family you build for yourself. What you put together is worth fighting for. Protect your loved ones with your life, and they'll give theirs in return. Family ain't defined by blood, understand that. And for as strong as the bonds of your family are, know that you'll find just as much passion in the people who hate you. While you'll risk your life for those you care about, those who find your existence to be an insult to theirs will risk themselves to put an end to their affliction. As cruel as it may seem, a man who hates you will stop at nothing until one of you is dead. It's a mistake to believe anything different. Don't let you be the ones taken from, be it by outlaw lawmen or by someone in between. The only one who'll be looking out for you is you and your kin. Maybe there's another way to be, but in all my years I've seen the worst of man, I ain't found another way around man's desire to conquer against all else. There ain't a changing of that mind, and sometimes I believe there ain't the ability for man to change at all, least of all through lead or legislation. I ain't claiming to be right about nothing. On many things, I don't want to be right. But what I do want is for my kids to live a better life than the one I did and avoid the mistakes that I made while finding the truth and purpose in what matter more than gold in this country. It's my hope that by sharing the things I learned that my kids will be better than their old man ever was, and that what I done isn't what people remember me for, but who y'all are going to become. That'll be the legend of Bill Cassidy.